High cost of living, low wage and declining competitiveness. Stay with us for the next 30 minutes as we speak about income classification, job creation and wages. And that's towards building a better Malaysia for all. I'm Muhammed Ahmad Hamdan and this is Money Matters. Hello, good evening and thanks for joining us on Money Matters. You can also watch us through HD on Tonton. Today we're going to speak with Professor Tan Sri Dr. Noor Azlan Ghazali, who has extensive experience in development, growth and competitiveness strategies and very much involved in public policy and strategic planning. He is currently UKM's Director for Malaysian Inclusive Development and Advancement Institute. Welcome to Money Matters, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Now, Prof, the Prime Minister mentioned that Malaysia is trapped in a vicious circle of high cost of living, low wage and declining competitiveness. Now, this is serious, declining competitiveness. Is this really as bad as it sounds for Malaysia?
It is. Actually, there are two kinds of traps. One is a trap which is broadly what we know as upper middle income trap. Way back in the early 90s, Malaysia enters the club of upper middle income class. But then we stretch to almost about 32 years. In that same class, we are having struggle of getting out from that class to be in the high income class. But I think what PM was telling in his speech of Economy Madani is basically to describe more insight into that trap. One is that we know that everyone is crying for high cost of living. Wages are low. The most recent report shows that more than about 2 million workers of Malaysia is basically earning less than 1,600 a month. And competitiveness-wise, if you look at the data, the easiest one is the IMD World Competitiveness Index. Back in 2010 up to 2016, we are in the range of 12 to 16 to 18, 19, like that.
Where are we today?
Yeah, but last year we were 32. And this year, the most recent, we are at 27, which I believe that compared to about, let's say, in the 2010 to 2015, this is too far down. And I think it's a red alarm for us that we must act now.
Right. Professor, now some of these issues are what I call legacy issues. They've been around for many years through different various administrations in the past. Right. Now, is it possible to break this circle and free ourselves from this decades-long trap?
It is. I'm very sure it is possible. If you look at the history of Malaysian economic development, I mean, earlier on, up till 2008 or 2010, in 2008 is a special year because the World Bank make basically there's a very detailed study came out. They call it growth reports that shows that there are 13 countries in the world that are able to maintain a very long period of high growth, and one of them is Malaysia. And according to the report, it is not a miracle. It is something, the right policy, the right strategies, and therefore they believe that this can be repeated. On that ground alone, I believe that if we do it right now, we have definitely we must have a commitment, consistency, and also willing to kind of bite the bullet. Then we will be able to reverse back this trend. But that commitment must come not only from the leadership, not only from the government, but from the private sectors and broadly the rakyat itself.
Now, you said it earlier. You're right. The Prime Minister has, in fact, come up with this new economic plan called the Madani economy. But some say that this is just another political buzzword. What do you say?
Well, I mean, I think, let's be fair, all politicians need some brand. I'm not worried so much about what you want to call it, whether Madani or whatever you want to call it. most important for economists like me is to look at the content. What is actually inside that?
Correct.
So on that ground, that's why, I mean, over the last few weeks, I've been kind of put my endorsement to it. Because I think that is something that I've been calling for a long time as well. One is about we must restructure our economy. And number two, we must make sure that whatever growth that we achieve, it must filter down to the public, to the rakyat.
You're right,
so these are the two pillars of economy madani. Call whatever you want to call it. But to me, these are the right content that will take Malaysia moving forward, if we do it right.
So that's your verdict for Madani economy.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about the country's state of economy, what is the progress that we are seeing at the moment in terms of our economy? And do you think the Madani economy framework can satisfy the need of the nation and also of the people?
Yeah, I mean, well, 8 months, I know that people were saying that, I mean, some are expecting that 8 months you can do all things to resolve all problems. I don't see it that way. For one thing, that what I really hope for is that government make a clear recognitions, accepting the problems that we are facing, and from there having a framework of moving forward. There's a little delay in terms of the kind of the clarity of the framework, but now we have this framework, right? And I believe that. That's why, I mean, over the last few days, I've been making strong call for the government that, yes, you have announced a framework, but the challenge now is execution.
Right.
I've seen so many plans, Muhammad. I've seen from the new economic model during Datuk Sri Najib, I've seen RMK 12, I've seen various 5-year plan for Malaysia, and many sub-sectoral plan. I will conclude in a simple way. All plans are great. All leaders want to make sure the country progress. Everybody wants to see the improved well-being of the rakyat. The challenge is execution. So now things are on the table. We want to make sure that economy madani will be executed, and we want to know what's the progress, what are basically the reports, and to make sure there are people who are accountable to make sure that these are delivered as being narrated in the speech.
Great, Professor. Now, income classifications, we want to look at that and discuss a little bit more on that. But before we do that, we're going to go for a quick commercial break. So don't go away, because Money Matters will be back shortly. Welcome back to Money Matters. We're speaking with Professor Tan Sri Dr. Noor Azlan Ghazali of UKM. Now, Professor, it is said that the B40, M40 and T20 system does not reflect the actual situation on the ground. My question is, did the system work before? And if it did, at what point in the past did we start to realize that, hey, this is not working anymore and we need to change this?
This so-called jargons of how you classify the society, the B40, the M40 and T20, it started somewhere come near to 2010. I remember I was there at M10 at that time. The intention originally is not about to be used as a policy variable in terms of allocating welfare support and so on.
Right.
It's just a mere relative classification. It's okay to use that to understand within a country what is the level of the bottom, middle, and the top. But there is nothing special about it. You can slice however you want it. You can put 20, 20, 60. You can put 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, whatever, as long as the total is 100. No, I mean, we are a bit confused on that. I think the nation are a little bit confused on that. If we go to the richest country in the world, let's say, for example, we go to Luxembourg. I mean, they are a very rich country. Again, if you look into the classification, there are B40 there still. So B40 should not be automatically equate to the difficulties of living, right? And more so when you try to use one-liners in one country. Like in Malaysia, for example, now the B40, the most recent has dropped a bit. Before it was 4,850 ringgit, now is 3,440 ringgit. So let's talk about 4,850. So if you are 4,850 ringgit Malaysia 4,850 in Klang Valley, you are in trouble. You are even worse than B40 probably. But if you, with that amount of income, if you live in a more rural areas, 4,850 is good. So that is where the problem starts. When we use this relative income classification as a policy guidance, especially in terms about who to get what from the government. And I think that is where we start to see a lot of leakages, a lot of things that are not reaching the right people. So I think it's very timely. I mean, I fully support the idea that we must get out of this thinking that B40, M40, and T20, because forever we will have that B40, M40, and T20. So we need to find a new way of doing it.
I think the idea is to have this income group be based on, the economy minister, Rafizi Ramli, said it should be based on household net income, net disposable income, as opposed to currently it is just household income. And it also takes, and the new one is supposed to also take into account the number of dependents in within that household and the location, like you said, earlier. Okay,
let me try to, try to look at what is being proposed by the minister. Well, first, redefining it, I'm okay with that. But then, what are the parameters that we're going to use? The two that you mentioned, one is about
dependence,
where you are located. Locations. That is very important. Number two is that who are depending on that source of income. So these two are very important. But I have a little reservation in terms of disposable income, because that is a very subjective and very hard to determine. It depends on declaration and so on. I am more inclined toward using the living wage as measured by EPF, NUC Malaya, the Belanjawanku reports. Basically, they're looking at what are the level of wage ataupun income that you need to achieve in order for you to have a decent living. I think for Malaysia, after 60 plus years of independence, I think for us, it's time for us to look into quality of living. We are, yes, we do still have poverty. We have hardcore poverty, no doubt about it. But I think the cries out there is more about the quality of living. That's why when you look at them, they're not looking, they're not seems to be poor. They have almost all the basic things, but the life is under stress. So we need to look at that level of income, meaning that if you are located, let's say, for example, in Alustar, you and your wife and 2 kids, the question that we should ask is that what amount of income that will allow you to achieve a decent living? Not about being rich, about a decent living. So, for example, like the latest calculation is about, in Alustar, is about 5,430. And that goes all the way. I mean, different than the numbers of the line of poverty, hardcore poverty, B40, and so on. So this living income give more human value into it.
Now, the government's plan is to do away with these income classifications. Now, details are scarce. But how do you think this could translate to creating a more prosperous economy in the country?
First is that the best is actually, well, the most ideal situation is that no one will need a support from the government, right? That's the most ideal situation. Probably we will not be able to reach that. Okay, let's assume that people with difficulties, permanent disabilities, you know, all these kind of handicaps and so on, they need that support. So we put that aside. Therefore, then, we have a productive society. To me, what most important is to find a way of how this productive society to be able to earn themselves. So you have to kind of increase the capabilities, increase their capacities, their knowledge, their skills, and also giving more opportunities for them. Therefore, we need economic vibrancy. I think that is the best approach, rather than thinking that forever we have to kind of issue welfare support for a large portion of the society. After all, if let's say you use a B40 class, I mean, what it means that 40% of the household seems like forever they're going to get the support from the government. So we need to find different measures that will also declare some kind of graduation from it.
Right.
It's an auto-graduation. You know, when you reach to that level, we know that you're going to have a decent living, and therefore the rest is about you and your hard work.
That sounds very, very interesting. And, you know, this is an uphill task if we were to really implement what you have just proposed earlier. What are, do you think, some of the challenges that the government may face in meeting the target of rolling out this new system in January 2024? Do you think, 4 to 5 months' time from now is enough time to introduce such a comprehensive 10-year economic plan?
Well, broadly, in terms of capabilities and capacity, there are various programs already in place. Especially out of COVID, there's a lot of allocations through Pekeso, through various agencies that try to uplift and upskill our society. But again, the reach out is a very, is a concern. Whether does everybody really come forward to take up these opportunities or not? So we need to do a bit more on that side. But again, I don't think that everything will be solved in just a few months in time, right?
Sure.
But most important is that we want to see that we are moving toward that. We are moving to the right direction. What we don't want is to turn back and end up to where we were before.
Right.
So I think these are very important. And yes, if you want to help, if the government would like to support certain group of society, it must be clear. I mean, from the beginning, there are 4 things that need to be asked. All programs. This is, I think, missing in the current way of how we do public policies. One is that why are we helping them? Is it that because they are poor, they are not able to work? Is it that we want to improve their productivity?
Okay.
Right? And then number 2, very quickly, is that who are they? These are the issues that you raised.
Yeah.
How do we identify them? And the best identification possible, minimize the errors, right? Third is that how are you going to help them? To give them cash, to give them discount, to give them coupons, or reimburse. And most important, I think we need to do it now. All policies, there must be a clear when to start and when to end. There is no ending at the moment.
Right.
That worries me. Yeah.
Now, Prof, we're going to go for another quick commercial
Okay.
break. We'll be looking at job creation and wages after we come back, so don't go away. Money Matters, we'll be back shortly. Thanks for staying with us on Money Matters. We're still speaking with Professor Tan Sri Dr. Noor Azlan Ghazali of UKM. Now, Professor, it was revealed that more than 2 million Malaysian workers were still earning less than 2,000 ringgit a month, like you mentioned earlier. The proposed progressive salary policy announced by the Prime Minister, how can the policy be formulated and implemented to tackle low wages, especially?
That is one of the major problems with us in Malaysia, is that income is relatively either stagnant or increased at a very, very slow rate, right? Actually, it is across all, at the high skill, at the middle skill, at the bottom end as well. But of course, our concern mostly is at the bottom end, that the median wage is very low, right? I mean, last was 2250 ringgit, something like that. I mean, the report in 2019. Now, before we come up with new framework, before we come up with new rules, we have to understand what actually causes the problems. I think, again, yes, I'm glad that government are focusing on income. There is initiative Pendapatan Rakyat now, moved by our minister. That's great. That is very good. I mean, because there's a tendency before this that we want to focus on prices. We want to bring down prices to the lowest possible. But now the focus shifted to income, which is fantastic. Again, the challenge is that how we do it. Why income are stagnant? Is it because we don't have a system like the progressive wage system, or is it because of some structural issue in the country?
Right.
Economics, 101 economics, first year that you learn. When you have problem with prices, look at supply and demand first. So simple, right? Wages are price, the price of labor. So if you have problem with wages, then look at supply and demand. I would like to raise a very important issue, was mentioned by PM in the Economy Madani speech.
So you're saying supply is more than demand?
Well, what you are seeing here is not only supply is more than demand, but at the lower end, we are so relaxed in terms of bringing foreign workforce that are crowding out Malaysians. I think if you look at the numbers, it's just way beyond what we can imagine. I mean, on record, when I check with the official data, it says there are about 2 million, but I think it's a lot more than that, in terms of the lower-end workforce. So when there are so many of them crowding into Malaysia, it push out.
The way they justify this is that these are the kind of jobs that Malaysians do not want to do.
There's a problem. I mean, if you go to many other countries, why is that Japanese can do all the 3D work themselves?
Right.
Why is that in so many other countries, the national people in their own country can do it? Because wages are low, and the working environment are not suiting with the context of Malaysian today. So we have to be very careful. The other one is that a little reservation that I have is that should the government comes in and set up, I mean, like wages again, the real word is actually government comes in trying to set the price for labor. I'm very careful about government go in and trying to do that kind of things. And the other thing is that we must understand that the system works under certain conditions. One is that the closest I know, everybody's looking at Singapore. But you must understand that policy in Singapore is targeting at Singaporean. In Malaysia, who are working at the lower end? Is it Malaysians? They're not. So who are you helping actually? And there are a large portion of Malaysians working in the informal sector. I heard Pekasso's chief were calling for businesses to register themselves to make it formal, because you need to identify them. In our case, if you are talking about cleaners, you are talking about people who are doing gardening, landscaping, there is no formalities there.
Right.
So if we might seem to have a new structure, a new wage scheme, but my concern is in terms of the execution. And also, there are implications on the fiscal side. Because whenever you introduce this program, it means that government also have to come in stronger in terms of supporting the businesses in order for them to abide to PWS. So I'm glad that in M10, actually, the decision is to study more, to engage more, and it's not a final decision yet. But I would like to caution, I think, in terms of...
You're not really in favor of government interference in...
Yeah, there is a role that government can play, but not
free market.
Not to the point that you start to introduce a new law and new regimes.
Right.
I mean, whenever we look into regulatory environment, sometimes the rule of thumb we say like this: you bring in one new law, one new rules, you take out two.
Right.
If not, you will be crowding with a lot of rules and regulations, and you will have hard time to enforce and to make sure that things are leading to something very efficient.
I agree. Now, this progressive salary policy, why do you think this policy, if I'm not mistaken, has not been included in the Madani economy?
Well, it is still something which is being mooted by our Minister in Economics. Is still being discussed. If I'm not mistaken, that's the first time when the M10 last week, I think they discussed that. And from the wordings of the statements of PM, it seems like there's a lot more that we need to understand before we introduce that right away. So, well, this thing you have to be steady about it, understand the problems, look at the context of the country, look at the structure of our economy. Something that works somewhere else does not mean that you can just plug here and works here.
Sure.
So you need to evaluate that very carefully.
Now, one of the targets under the Madani economy is to create more meaningful job opportunities, according to the Prime Minister. What does this mean exactly?
Well, I mean, first it's about monetary-wise is a reward, right? Whether is it fair with the reward. In Malaysia, we have about 1.9 million workers who are underemployed by skill, meaning as simple as someone who have a tertiary qualification but working as a clerk, something like that. So that is not something that yes, you might count them as employed, but I think inside that worker, I mean, there's a turbulence inside here to say that is it the right job that I should be getting? So PM used the word bermaruah sometimes, you know, that the job should not just give you monetary rewards, but the working environment must be suiting to the context of our living today. If we look from the perspective of the female, for example, PM also mentioned want to improve female participation to 60%. Because, well, we have to accept the fact that there's male and female. So the work environment, the work arrangement has to be contextually fit to this so-called biological part of us.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned a lot about execution is key.
Yeah.
Now, you're one of the advisors for the past administrations on, the country's economic direction. And then you said some of the things that you studied before with the previous or the past administrations were not implemented. We were still in a phase where you were still studying some of these matters. Why there was no implementation for those things?
Yeah, that's why, I mean, once you come up with a plan, there must be the governance of executions. You know, you just announce it and suddenly it will happen. And a lot of things that we are facing, all the so-called problems that PM highlighted in the speech, basically requires not only just one ministry to do it. It needs a coordination of people to do it together. Right. You know, for example, that if you want to go into a new growth areas, let's say you want to go into aerospace industries, you need mostly science and technology. You need higher education to train people in that. You need human resource. You need so many other ministries. So very important that we have that so-called governance to execute. That's why I've been calling for that. Institutionalize this economy Madani in a way that there is a clear plan, how we want to execute, how we want to monitor, and how we want to report, and how we want to review. A plan might be too ambitious, that's fine, but as long as we know that we can review that along the way. But my concern and my worries is that there are so many plans on the table, but we do not know where they are. I think I have a problem with that.
Okay, fantastic, Professor. Professor Tan Sri Dr. Noor Azlan Ghazali, UKM's Director for Malaysian Inclusive Development and Advancement Institute. Thank you once again for taking your time to be with us on this episode of Money Matters. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. For the past half an hour, you've been with us on Money Matters. If you missed the earlier part of this episode, you can also catch it up on Tonton. Do join us again next week, same time, right here on TV3 for more money insights that matter. For the state elections updates and live results, catch our special program later tonight, Mandat Rakyat at 9 p.m, right here on TV3. I'm Muhammed Ahmad Hamdan. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.